The bank representative was still talking when I noticed my son-in-law leaning against his new Range Rover in my driveway, phone raised, filming the whole thing with a grin that could have split his face in half. "Sir, I just need you to confirm receipt of the disbursement notice," the young man from First Piedmont Bank said, holding a manila envelope toward me with both hands like an offering. He had the look of someone who had been told this would be a routine stop. My son-in-law called out from the driveway, "Go ahead and sign it, old man. Consider it your retirement gift, from me to me." He laughed at his own joke. Behind him, my daughter stood with her arms folded, not laughing, just watching with that expression I had learned to read over the past 3 months. Satisfied. Certain. I looked down at the envelope, then back at the young representative from the bank. I asked him one question. His face went white. "My name is Virgil Drummond. I am 64 years old, a widower, and for 38 years I worked as a forensic accountant, first for a regional firm in Charlotte, then as a senior partner specializing in financial fraud detection. I spent my career following money through shell companies, falsified ledgers, and creative accounting schemes that would make a tax attorney's hair stand on end. I retired 3 years ago to a craftsman-style house I built in the foothills outside Asheville, North Carolina, on 4.5 acres of old hardwood forest my late wife and I had purchased the year our daughter was born. My wife passed away 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast, the way that kind always does. One spring she was planting perennials along the back fence. By November she was gone. I will not try to describe what that loss felt like. Anyone who has carried it knows. Anyone who hasn't, I hope you never do. What I will tell you is this. Grief has a particular way of lowering your defenses. It softens the edges of your judgment. You start making decisions with your heart instead of your mind, because your mind is too exhausted to argue. I knew this about myself. I had watched it happen to other people. I thought I was immune to it because I understood the mechanism. I was wrong about that. Welcome to Ivory Vengeance. If stories like this one speak to you, stay close. And before we go any further, when someone you love uses your trust against you, is your instinct to confront them immediately, or to go quiet, gather everything you need, and let them believe they've already won? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. A note before we continue. Some details in this story have been shaped for storytelling. Any resemblance to specific real individuals or events is coincidental. What matters is the truth at the center of it. 3 months before that morning on my front porch, my daughter arrived at my door on a Thursday evening in January. She pulled into the gravel drive just after dark, and I could tell from the way she parked, half off the edge, door open before the engine stopped, that something was wrong. She came inside and sat at the kitchen table, and she cried the way she hadn't cried since she was small. My son-in-law followed her in without knocking, the way he always did, and settled across from her with that particular expression he wore when he wanted to appear broken, but couldn't quite commit to it. He was 44 years old, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having been genuinely accountable for anything. He ran what he called a business consulting firm out of a rented suite downtown. I had never fully understood what he actually sold, and the few times I pressed him on it, he pivoted to jargon and changed the subject. My daughter told me they were in serious trouble. Her husband's firm had taken on a large contract with a commercial developer, she said, and the developer had walked away mid-project, leaving them exposed on a substantial line of credit. The bank was calling the loan. They were facing the loss of their home, possibly bankruptcy. She needed help. I told her I would write a check. Whatever I could liquidate comfortably. I had decent savings outside my retirement accounts, and I was willing to put a meaningful portion of it toward keeping my daughter out of a crisis. My son-in-law shook his head slowly, the way a man does when he has already decided the answer he wants, and is simply waiting for the conversation to catch up to it. "It's not that simple, Dad," he said, calling me that the way he sometimes did when he wanted something. "The bank isn't looking for a personal gift. They need to see that the debt is backed by established financial assets. Your retirement portfolio, your IRA, those are exactly the kind of institutional holdings that would satisfy their requirements. All we need is a financial authorization so that your accounts can be referenced as supporting collateral." I tensed at that. My IRA held 38 years of deliberate, disciplined savings. I told him plainly I was not comfortable putting retirement accounts into any arrangement involving his business liabilities. He raised both hands immediately. Not a lien, Dad, not a pledge. Nothing gets touched. We're talking about a durable power of attorney, a limited financial authorization that lets the bank see your portfolio on paper. Standard practice. My attorney drafted it this week. My daughter reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Her fingers were cold. Her eyes were red from crying, and she said the one thing that reached past every rational objection I had left. Mom made me promise I'd always be able to come to you, she whispered. She said you'd always be there. Please don't let us lose our home. I heard my wife's voice in that sentence. Not because my daughter was right to invoke it, but because grief doesn't care about right. It just opens you up like a wound and lets everything in. I told them to come back in the morning with the paperwork. My son-in-law's attorney arrived the next day, a man named Pruitt, who had the look of someone perpetually managing anxiety with a smile slightly too wide for his face. He spread the documents across my kitchen table, with the practiced efficiency of a man who has done this many times before and has learned exactly how much speed to use when he wants someone not to read something too carefully. I picked up the stack and began working through it. The opening pages were legitimate. The language described a limited durable power of attorney, restricted to financial institutions, for the purpose of asset verification in connection with a commercial loan restructuring. It matched what my son-in-law had described the night before. I read those pages twice. I initialed where Pruitt directed, signed at the 3 flag tabs, and handed back the pen. What I did not see, what had been buried with surgical precision in the center of that stack, was a separate addendum. 7 pages in, behind a dense block of standard financial disclosure language I had skimmed rather than read, was a clause granting unrestricted disbursement authority over my IRA accounts at First Piedmont Bank. Not verification authority, not reference authority, disbursements authority, the power to move money out. I had signed it with the same pen I had used to initial the pages I actually understood. I did not know any of this for 6 weeks. Life moved in the slow, quiet rhythm it had settled into since my wife passed. I tended the hardwood lot. I worked in the workshop. I cooked the kind of meals that only feed one person, which is its own particular kind of loneliness. Then in late February, I sat down to review my monthly account statements, the way I had done every month for 35 years. I opened the envelope from First Piedmont Bank. My IRA balance was $14.22. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time without moving. In 38 years of forensic accounting, I had seen fraud in 100 forms. I had testified in federal court. I had handed evidence to the FBI, the SEC, and the IRS. I had spent my career tracing stolen money through layered corporate accounts and offshore instruments. I knew exactly what a fraudulent disbursement looked like in a bank statement. I was looking at one now. It had my own name on it. I did not call my daughter. I did not call my son-in-law. I did not call the bank. I stood up, walked to my workshop, and sat on the stool beside my lathe for about 20 minutes in the quiet and the sawdust smell. Then I came back inside and did what I had done 100 times across a 38-year career. I started pulling records. A retired forensic accountant has certain advantages in a situation like this. I still had professional relationships. Auditors, compliance officers, a former SEC investigator named Aldous Breck, who owed me a conversation going back to a securities case we had worked together in 2009. I had access to legal databases. I understood how financial fraud was constructed, which meant I understood exactly how to document it. Over the next 9 days, I built a case file. What I found was worse than I had anticipated. My son-in-law had not simply moved my IRA funds into a general account. He had routed the disbursement, $380,000, representing nearly my entire IRA, through 2 intermediate transfer accounts, both registered to entities connected to his consulting firm, before parking the money in a personal investment account held offshore. The wire transfers had crossed state lines and touched a federally insured financial institution. Every step of that chain was a federal crime. But I also found something else. Something my son-in-law and his attorney had clearly never bothered to investigate before they executed their scheme. The IRA account at First Piedmont Bank was not my primary asset. It had not been for 7 years. In 2017, on the advice of an estate planning attorney following my wife's first major health scare, a false alarm that turned out to be nothing, but which frightened us badly enough to start planning properly. I had established a charitable remainder trust. The trust was managed by the endowment office of the university, where I had earned my accounting degree, an institution with no connection whatsoever to anyone in our family's financial circles. I had transferred my most significant holdings into it, investment accounts, property interests, a structured annuity, and designated myself as the income beneficiary. The university foundation held the remainder interest. I drew a quarterly income payment. The trust assets themselves were controlled entirely by the foundation's independent trustees. A durable power of attorney, even an unrestricted one, cannot override a charitable remainder trust. The assets inside that structure are not legally mine to transfer, pledge, liquidate, or authorize anyone else to access. The foundation's trustees are the legal owners. My son-in-law had drafted a document giving himself authority over something I did not actually control. He had spent 6 weeks believing he had stolen a fortune from a trusting old man. What he had actually done was commit federal wire fraud against a bank, using a forged instrument to take money that represented only a small fraction of what he thought he was taking, while the real assets sat untouched in a trust he did not know existed. I leaned back in my desk chair and looked out the window at the hardwood lot. Then I picked up the phone and called Aldous Breck. Aldous had retired from the SEC's enforcement division 2 years before I left accounting. He now worked as a private litigation consultant with a firm in Raleigh. When I told him what I had, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Virgil, you need to be in my office tomorrow morning. Bring everything." I drove before dawn the next day. I took the back route through the foothills rather than the interstate, partly because I still was not certain my son-in-law had no visibility into my movements. A man who had installed financial monitoring through forged paperwork was capable of other arrangements. Aldous reviewed the entire case file without interruption. When he finished, he set the last page flat on the desk and looked at me. "The wire transfers are textbook federal bank fraud," he said. "The forged disbursement addendum, the layered transfer accounts, the offshore destination, any U.S. attorney would take this case. The question is timing. Do you want to move now, or do you want to let this run long enough to make certain you have everything?" I told him I wanted to be certain. I wanted every account traced. I wanted to know how much of the stolen money was still accessible and how much had already been spent. And I wanted my son-in-law to believe, in the meantime, that everything was proceeding exactly as he expected. That I was still the cooperative, grieving old man who had signed papers without reading them. Aldous nodded once. "Then you're going to have to perform," he said. I told him I had done harder things. What followed was 6 weeks of the most disciplined acting I have ever done. I called my daughter every few days. I let my voice carry a slight tremor I did not feel. I mentioned confusion, small things, mild things. I said I had misplaced my reading glasses twice in one morning. I said I wasn't sleeping well. I said the house felt different in winter without her mother in it, which was true enough that it required no performance at all. My daughter listened to all of this with a patience I recognized immediately as the patience of someone waiting for an outcome rather than actually listening. My son-in-law came by once in early March, ostensibly to drop off a casserole dish my daughter had left the last time they visited. He stood in my kitchen with that easy, cheerful manner he always used as armor, and I stood at the counter with my coffee and let him look around the house the way he did, assessing, calculating, measuring the remaining distance between what he wanted and what he had already taken. I told him I had been having some trouble understanding my account statements lately. Too many numbers. He told me not to worry about it, that he and my daughter were keeping an eye on things for me. He smiled when he said it. I thanked him and offered coffee. He declined and left quickly. Outside the window, I watched him back his new Range Rover down the gravel drive. He had bought it 2 weeks after my IRA was liquidated. I let him go. By the end of March, Aldous had traced every transfer. The full $380,000 was documented, the routing through the intermediate accounts, the offshore deposit, and the subsequent partial liquidation that had funded the Range Rover, a long weekend at a resort in Scottsdale, and a wire transfer to a business partner, whose name appeared on 3 of the disbursement authorizations. There were 2 people involved in this, not 1. Aldous had also confirmed the charitable remainder trust angle with the University Foundation's attorneys, who had been quietly notified. The trust assets had never been touched. My son-in-law had no legal claim to them. He had taken my smallest account, my most accessible account, the one I kept for ordinary living expenses, and called it a fortune. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of North Carolina had been briefed. They were ready to move when I gave the word. I told Aldous to wait. I had one more thing to arrange. I called my daughter on a Tuesday afternoon and told her I was having some chest flutters. Nothing serious, but unsettling. I said I was confused about some letters arriving from the bank. Account activity I didn't understand. I said I was worried and would she please come by. She arrived the next morning. My son-in-law drove her. I had made coffee weak the way my daughter liked it, and shuffled to the door with deliberate slowness. I had dressed in my barn clothes. I left a half-eaten bowl of oatmeal on the counter. I let my hand shake slightly as I opened the door. They came inside and sat down. My son-in-law looked around the house with the expression of a man conducting an inventory. My daughter put her hand on mine and asked how I was feeling. I said old and tired and confused. She nodded with an expression that did not quite reach her eyes. I excused myself briefly. I was gone for 4 minutes. When I came back, I sat down and we talked for another hour. I circled the same mild confusions. I asked the same questions twice. I thanked them both for looking after things for me. My son-in-law patted my shoulder on the way out and said everything was going to be fine. I watched their car disappear off the road. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, poured the rest of my coffee, and called Aldous. I said, now. The following Monday morning, the young compliance officer from First Piedmont Bank arrived at my front door with his folder and his nervous energy. My son-in-law had followed him in, parked at the edge of the gravel, and was filming on his phone with that grin. My daughter stood beside the Range Rover, with her arms crossed. The representative explained that he was there to deliver a disbursement notification and to request confirmation of an account instruction filed under the durable power of attorney. I let him finish. Then I asked him one question. I asked, in a voice that did not shake even slightly, whether his compliance department had cross-referenced the power of attorney against the trust instruments on file with First Piedmont's Trust Services Division. Specifically, the charitable remainder trust established in my name in 2017, which held primary authority over the asset classes described in that authorization. The young man stopped. He opened his folder and stared at it. Then he looked up at me. He said he did not have that information. I told him I did not think he would. He reached for his phone. What happened in the next 90 minutes unfolded the way large things tend to, not all at once, but in a sequence of escalations that each made the next inevitable. The compliance officer made his call. The bank's Trust Services Division confirmed what he had been told to verify. The charitable remainder trust was real, active, and structurally insulated from any power of attorney instrument. My son-in-law's authorization was legally effective only as to the accounts it had already been used to drain, which meant the fraud was now fully documented, and the only remaining question was federal jurisdiction. 2 county sheriff's deputies arrived in the driveway 11 minutes later. They were followed 6 minutes after that by 2 vehicles from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit out of Charlotte. 4 agents, all purposeful, none inclined toward conversation. My son-in-law saw the federal plates turn off the road. He saw the agent step out. The grin left his face so completely, and so suddenly it was like watching a light switch turned off. He lowered his phone. He looked at my daughter. She took 2 steps backward. I walked down off the porch and crossed the gravel to where they stood. He tried to speak first. Something about misunderstandings, documentation, how this could all be resolved if everyone just took a breath. His voice had gone tight and high in a way I had never heard from him before. He was discovering what it felt like to be genuinely afraid, possibly for the first time. I looked at him with no particular expression. "You spent 6 weeks believing you had stolen my retirement savings," I said. "You bought a truck with it. You went to Arizona. You moved the rest offshore, and then you came to my house and patted my shoulder and told me everything was going to be fine." I paused. In 38 years of forensic accounting, the single most fundamental thing I learned was this. The most dangerous mistake you can make in a fraud scheme is to assume you've found all the assets. because you almost never have." He stared at me. He opened his mouth and closed it again. I turned to my daughter. She had arranged her face into something that was almost crying, the preparatory expression of someone deciding whether to perform grief or actually feel it. She took one step toward me, and I saw it, the same look from when she was 8 years old and had broken something, and was deciding whether to confess or deflect. "Daddy," she started. "Your mother asked me to take care of you," I said. "She meant protect you from harm. She did not mean hand you everything until there was nothing left of me to give. I know the difference. I should have held it sooner." An agent stepped forward and addressed them both. He was quiet and professional about it. He explained what they were being detained for and read them their rights with the practiced economy of someone who has done it many times and has stopped finding it remarkable. My daughter turned to look at me one last time as the agent walked her toward the vehicle. Her face had collapsed into something I did not have a name for, not quite remorse, more like a recognition arriving too late. I did not look away. I did not reach for her. I stood in my own driveway, on my own 4.5 acres of hardwood forest, and I let the law do what I had spent a career helping it do. The federal case moved steadily in the months that followed. My son-in-law was charged with wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy. His business partner was indicted separately on related charges. The offshore account was frozen within 48 hours. The funds were largely intact, which surprised me only slightly. He had moved fast, but federal asset recovery moves faster when the paperwork is as clean as mine was. My daughter cooperated with prosecutors and received a significantly reduced charge in exchange. I was not asked for my opinion on that arrangement, and I did not offer one. The charitable remainder trust assets remained untouched throughout. My IRA became the subject of a civil restitution claim that Aldous handled with his customary efficiency. Most of the money will be recovered. Some evenings I sit on the back porch where the hardwood lot runs up the hill, and I listen to the particular sound the ridge makes in the late afternoon when the wind comes in off the mountains. My wife planted 3 dogwood trees along the fence line the first summer we owned this land. They bloom every April without fail. They do not know anything happened here. They just bloom. I have been asked, in the months since all of this, whether I regret not acting sooner, whether there was a moment I should have seen it clearly and chose not to. The honest answer is yes. The data was there. The instincts were there. A forensic accountant has no business being surprised by a fraud scheme assembled at his own kitchen table. But grief does what it does. It opens the parts of you that training spent years learning to keep closed. And some things you sign not because you failed to think, but because you chose, in one unguarded moment, to love someone more than you doubted them. I have made my peace with that. The choice was mine. So was everything that came after it. I poured myself a measure of bourbon on the evening the final indictment was confirmed. I sat in the workshop where the smell of wood and oil and honest work had been accumulating for 30 years. I raised the glass to no one in particular, or perhaps to someone no longer there to raise one back. Then I set it down, walked inside, and turned the deadbolt. This house is mine. It always was.